This is Jenny, and I'm reading from Jest by David Foster Wallace. I'm starting on page 145. I have no idea what the name of this chapter is. This is the section about why videophony or videophony went away in the near future. And the ironic part is I'm actually recording it on video, but I've taped up the camera. I think it makes sense considering. So why the abrupt consumer retreat back to good old voice-only telephoning? The answer, in a kind of trivial nutshell, is number 1, emotional stress, number 2, physical vanity, and number 3, a certain queer kind of self-obliterating logic in the microeconomics of consumer high-tech. Number 1. It turned out that there was something terribly stressful about visual telephone interfaces that hadn't been stressful at all about voice-only interfaces. Videophone consumers seemed suddenly to realize that they'd been subject to an insidious but wholly marvelous delusion about conventional voice-only telephony. They'd never noticed it before, the delusion. It's like it was so emotionally complex that it could be countenanced only in the context of its loss. Good old traditional audio-only phone conversations allowed you to presume that the person on the other end was paying complete attention to you, while also permitting you not to have to pay anything even close to complete attention to her. A traditional oral-only conversation, utilizing a handheld phone whose earpiece contained only 6 little pinholes, but whose mouthpiece, rather significantly, it later seemed, contained 6 squared or 36 little pinholes, let you enter a kind of highway hypnotic semi-attentive fugue. While conversing, you could look around the room, doodle, fine-groom, peel tiny bits of dead skin away from your cuticles, compose phone pad haiku, stir things on the stove. You could even carry on a whole separate additional sign language and exaggerated facial expression type of conversation with people right there in the room with you, all while seeming to be right there attending closely to the voice on the phone. And yet, and this was the retrospectively marvelous part, even as you were dividing your attention between the phone call and all sorts of other idle little fugue-like activities, you were somehow never haunted by the suspicion that the person on the other end's attention might be similarly divided. During a traditional call, e.g., as you, let's say, performed a close tactile blemish scan of your chin, you were in no way oppressed by the thought that your phone mate was perhaps also devoting a good percentage of her attention to a close tactile blemish scan. It was an illusion, and the illusion was aural, and aurally supported. The phone line's other end's voice was dense, tightly compressed, and vectored right into your ear, enabling you to imagine that the voice's owner's attention was similarly compressed and focused, even though your own attention was not, was the thing. This bilateral illusion of unilateral attention was almost infantilely gratifying from an emotional standpoint. You got to believe you were receiving somebody's complete attention without having to return it. Regarded with the objectivity of hindsight, the illusion appears irrational, almost literally fantastic. It would be like being able both to lie and to trust other people at the same time. Video telephony, rendered the fantasy insupportable. Callers now found they had to compose the same sort of earnest, slightly over-intense listener's expression they had to compose for in-person exchanges. Those callers who out of unconscious habit succumbed to fugue-like doodling or pants crease adjustment now came off looking rude, absent-minded, or childishly self-absorbed. Callers who even more unconsciously blemish-scanned or nostril-explored looked up to find horrified expressions on the video faces at the other end, all of which resulted in videophonic stress. Even worse, of course, was the traumatic expulsion from Eden feeling of looking up from tracing your thumb's outline on the reminder pad, or adjusting the old unit's angle of repose in your shorts and actually seeing your videophonic interfacee idly strip a shoelace of its gumlet as she talked to you, and suddenly realizing your whole infantile fantasy of commanding your partner's attention while you yourself got to fugue doodle and make little genital adjustments was deluded and insupportable, and that you were actually commanding not one bit more attention than you were paying here. The whole attention business was monstrously stressful, video callers found. 2. And the videophonic stress was even worse if you were at all vain, i.e., if you worried at all about how you looked. as in to other people. Which, all kidding aside, who doesn't? Good old RL telephone calls could be fielded without makeup, toupee, surgical prostheses, etc., even without clothes, if that sort of thing rattled your saber. But for the image-conscious, there was, of course, no such answer-as-you-are informality about visual video telephone calls, which consumers began to see were less like having the good old phone ring than having the doorbell ring, and having to throw on clothes and attach prostheses and do hair checks in the foyer mirror before answering the door. But the real coffin nail for videophony involved the way callers' faces looked on their TP screen during calls. Not their callers' faces, but their own when they saw them on video. It was a three-button affair, after all. To use the TP's cartridge card's video record option to record both pulses in a two-way visual call and play the call back and see how your face had actually looked to the other person during the call. This sort of appearance check was no more resistible than a mirror, but the experience proved almost universally horrifying. People were horrified at how their own faces appeared on a TP screen. It wasn't just Anchorman's bloat, that well-known expression of extra weight that video inflicts on the face. It was worse. Even with high-end TP's high-def viewer screens, consumers perceived something essentially blurred and moist-looking about their phone faces. A shiny pallid indefiniteness that struck them as not just unflattering, but somehow evasive, furtive, untrustworthy, unlikable. In an early and ominous interlaced GTE focus group survey that was all but ignored, in a storm of entrepreneurial sci-fi tech enthusiasm, almost 60% of respondents who received visual access to their own faces during videophonic calls specifically used the terms untrustworthy, unlikable, or hard to like in describing their own visage's appearance, with a phenomenally ominous 71% of senior citizen respondents specifically comparing their video faces to that of Richard Nixon during the Nixon-Kennedy debates of BS 1960. The proposed solution to what the telecommunications industry psychological consultants termed video physiognomic dysphoria, or VPD, was, of course, the advent of high-definition masking. And in fact, it was those entrepreneurs who gravitated toward the production of high-definition videophonic imaging and then outright masks who got in and out of the short-lived videophonic era with their shirts plus solid additional nets. I think I'll stop there.